Just a couple quick announcements before we get started. There's going to be a couple activities at 5:30 today. There's going to be lawn games out here if the weather's nice, and there's going to be a basketball game at the gym, at Fowler Gym. And then tonight at 9:30, there's going to be another open mic reading, this time at the Humphreys dorm. And we'll have some refreshments, but please feel free to bring some more if you like. And now, please welcome Andrew Hudgins.
Thank you. The last couple of times I've been here, I've done lectures on Robert Frost. Today I'm going to talk about a poet that I admire less but know better, me. Let me just, I'm going to take a poem of my own. On your handout you'll see that it's in 9 different verse forms, some better more competently executed than others. And but I'm only going to look at, in case you want to go ahead and find them on the form, the blank verse version on page 1, the to-be accentual version on page 2. I am a little more than 4. The iambic tetrameter on page 5. Then we'll look briefly at iambic tetrameter with some rhyme added. And then on the last page, a hexameter version of it. Okay. The lecture is just called Above the Playground. I have not been able to get a copy of Hannah Sullivan's The Work of Revision, published by Harvard University Press this May. My copy is on the way. But judging from a review in the Boston Globe, Sullivan argues that the work of literary revision was an innovation of the modernists that grew out of the invention of the typewriter, which made the work of revising simpler than handwriting permits. I'm curious about what Sullivan makes out of the various versions of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass, which Whitman began in 1850, published in 1855, and then, depending on how you count, went through 6 or 9 editions up to the deathbed edition of 1892. This is what the Boston Globe says in its review of Sullivan's The Work of Revision. Why do we continue to champion revision? Sullivan suggests it's partly due to the literary ideals and habits we've inherited from the modernists. She also mentions the professionalism of creative writing, which pushed authors like Ray Carver, and Oates, Joyce, to teach at universities. Writers need to look more like professors and to discuss their laborious processes, Sullivan says. We can't teach you how to write, but we can teach you how to revise, and it's a big business. So in case you thought your colleagues thought you were really professors, you now know better. Many of us had suspected this all along. Also a big business is the scholarly republishing of authors' draft materials, to name only a few. We have the famous facsimile of T.S. Eliot's The Waste Land that I and many of you, I'm sure, pored over soon after it was published in 1974. We have William Butler Yeats' manuscripts that Cornell University Press has been publishing in massive volumes, 30 of them so far. And we have Howl, subtitled Original Draft Facsimile, Transcript and Variant Versions, fully annotated by author with contemporaneous correspondent, accounts of first public reading, legal skirmishes, precursor texts, and bibliography. The subtitle alone might make one distrustful of Ginsberg's famous claim for spontaneous combustion, first thought, best thought. Though on Ginsberg's side of the argument, we have to admit that most readers believe that as Leaves of Grass became a more comprehensive statement of Whitman's ideas with each revision, it also became less energetic and exciting as poetry. But such studies give us a false sense of inevitability because we already know what the finished work looks like. Instead of looking at the draft sheets of a finished poem, I'd like to invite you into the work of a poem that is not finished and may never be. I pulled a brief sketch out of my notebooks and drafted a poem for you, or rather 9 poems, because I have drafted the one poem in 9 different metrical forms so we can explore together the literary bromide that form is meaning. Though I'll admit up front I've always been a bit skeptical of the unqualified certitude of that truism. I'm certain that form affects meaning, but I'm not sure it determines it. The poem has a possible ending, but I will present a number of other possible ways it could conclude. I began working with some notes I made while living in an apartment building. After 30 minutes of begrudged and sweating minutes on the elliptical machine on the top floor, I often went out on the roof to cool down, and looking down on the treetops, I glimpsed children playing in the schoolyard below. Some of the first steps in shaping the notes toward a poem seemed obvious. If I were writing prose, I might tell you where the building was, what I was doing there, and all the business about my 30 grouchy minutes on the elliptical machine, and then walking out sweaty on the roof in the roar of industrial air conditioners, watching the children exercise for pleasure, which I had done as a commitment. That depends on whether I was writing a 5,000-word essay or an 800-word newspaper piece. But with a poem, I instinctively omitted all of that. Though I didn't know what the point of the poem would be, I knew those details would be beside it. Instead, I began with a description of the bright leaves that formed a barrier between me and the children below. How much of this decision was possibly intrinsic human fascination with vivid autumn leaves, and how much was a learned response deriving from lyric poetry's historical bias toward nature, I can't really tell. As you'll see, I instinctively started shaping the poem toward blank verse as a default mode, and for reasons I don't entirely understand, other than I liked the way yellow repeated in the first line, I began consciously, at least in the early drafts, tilting the poem to words with L's and long O sounds, the easily lyrical and tripping L's joining with the mournful and surprised long O. When I was a younger poet, I would have disdained such musical effects as lush, unserious, even decadent. As I've aged, my ear has given in to debauchery. And since you've got that first early blank verse in front, Jesus, God, landed upright. But let me just read you these early notes, and you'll see how crude they are, I think. Through yellow, yellow brushed with red and red leaves, the children's shouting rises through the bright, unfallen leaves, voices mellowed to one unintelligible melody. I loved the idea of taking such an ungainly word as unintelligible with all those unstressed syllables and trying to make it work. I spent way too much time before I threw it out. In the air below me and above them, as I watched from my high window, except for flashes of color / movement / motion in the leaf gaps, they are only voices filtered between us, the electric crackle of a cardinal in the oaks. When I first got my hearing aids, I was taking the dogs for a walk, and I was standing in the middle of the road, and I heard some noise that was electric and strange, and I couldn't figure out what it was, and I stood there until I realized it was a cardinal. And up in the trees, it sounded like electricity. So I decided to describe the cardinals as, what was the phrase, electric crackle. Apparently nobody in the world hears cardinals that way but me, so I had, despite liking that, had to throw that out later too. And ashes, quarreling sparrows, and the wind ruffling the leaves to susurration, the heavy thwack of ball against brick wall and asphalt. Buried in the intervening leaves, you see we're wandering down to just sentence fragments now. Their voices freed of words fly 16 stories to my open window. From 16 stories atop the building, from the red, this is very painful, from the red and yellow leaves, the brown ones autumnally glorious. Oh, what a horrible phrase. And some bare limbs, a few bare trees. Then I mention a steeple. Of course, I described the steeple as serene. And that's enough of that. Thank you, dear. I'll drop this one too. Okay, here at the beginning, I had a stronger sense of what I didn't want to do than what I wanted to do. I didn't want the poem to be about the school children being at the ground level of life with many levels before them, as if we were pilgrims on Dante's mountain in the Purgatorio, with my being closer to death or heaven than they. At this point, I reminded of the joke. The Sunday school teacher asked the children what they have to be to get to heaven. One little boy shouts, "Dead." You didn't know that one? And the word school children suggests something else I didn't want the poem to evoke. Yeats's Among School Children, a poem I immediately looked up online, reread several times, and pasted into my notes to make sure I didn't go there. Or to make sure that if I did, the trip wouldn't be an accident. What did Flannery O'Connor say when she was asked if Faulkner was an influence? The presence alone of Faulkner in our midst makes a great difference in what the writer can and cannot permit himself to do. Nobody wants his mule and wagon stalled on the same track the Dixie Limited is roaring down. One might say the same thing about the Celtic Express. Another poem very much on my mind was T.S. Eliot's Burnt Norton, and I don't mind evoking it because my poem is, at an instinctive level, a response to its mysticism. This is from Burnt Norton. Footfalls echo in the memory down the passage which we did not take, towards the door we never opened, into the rose garden. My words echo thus in your mind, but to what purpose disturbing the dust on a bowl of rose leaves, I do not know. Other echoes inhabit the garden, shall we follow? Quick, said the bird, find them, round the corner, through the first gate, into our first world. Shall we follow the deception of the thrush into our first world? And then I'll go ahead a little bit. Go, said the bird, for the leaves were full of children, hidden excitedly, containing laughter. Go, 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 said the bird. Humankind cannot bear very much reality. If one doesn't want to be playing on the tracks for either the Celtic or the Dixie Express, I didn't necessarily want to be in front of the London Express either. I was also worried about the leaves in the first section of Shelley's Ode to the West Wind, and somewhat randomly, I kept thinking of Sarah Norcliffe Cleghorn's 1916 poem, The Golf Links. The golf links lie so near the mill that almost every day the laboring children can look out and see the men at play. As I was drafting the notes toward blank verse, I noticed an interesting rhythm asserting itself every 2 beats, and I wondered if a stronger movement might emerge if I tried that, tried the poem in that version. I like the rhythm a lot because it weighs words and phrases more heavily than usual against the sentence. But as I was composing this particular version, it also obscured my ability to develop the logic of the poem. My grasp on my own thinking got lost in the effects of the lines. I moved back to blank verse to complete drafting the poem. Around this time, I realized to my chagrin that the poem was one of those I stand at the window and think poems that I have always mocked for their innate solipsism. There was nothing to do but move forward and see if I could work within this limitation. Meditation on the self has its place in poetry too. I'm not entirely happy with the blank verse version. It's a little rough, as you can see. Blank verse, unrhymed iambic pentameter, is the workhorse verse form of English language poetry because it's so close to speech, but also close enough to lyric that we can hear its measure. Francis T. Palgrave excluded it from his famous and influential The Golden Treasury of English Songs and Lyrics in 1861 because blank verse and the 10-syllable couplet, with all pieces markedly dramatic, have been rejected as alien from what is commonly understood by song and rarely conforming to lyrical conditions in treatment. Perhaps because I tuned the poem so strongly to too stressed accentual early in the process, the poem is not as comfortable in blank verse as I desire. If you'll look at that, let me point out a few oddities for you. If I can find the right notes here. You'll see, just looking at it in the second line, in my notes I had red and red leaves. Here I changed it to foliage. I still fret about that. And foliage is a perfectly fine word. Frost uses it. He also often uses it as a two-syllable word, foliage. I'm not doing that. You'll also notice in this version the pairings take a lot of emphasis so that it says, sifted through the slurred trill of cardinals in the oaks and ashes, the heavy thwack of balls against brick wall and asphalt. And another two lines down, the children's joy and squabbles, mellow to a one doubtful melody in the air above. Okay, that's right. Above their shrill and fluid passions. That's a little heavily done, a lot heavily done. You'll also notice there are some places where the poem's a little heavy on prepositional phrases, ending lines. That's going to happen naturally enough, but that weak structure of the preposition is not something that you want to dominate in that strong part of the line, unless you have line and sentence, unless you have a very good reason for it. I continue in the third stanza here. It's easy now to dwell in elegance and adult, elegically balancing his unmourned childhood against his hope for theirs. Once off Cape Hatteras, I flailed my hands raw on granite breakwaters and nearly drowned with less despair than it took as a child to rise among the shadows and descend dark stairs just to piss. That's a little bit of something that I've been fussing about a lot. Do I need just in there? Is the point clear enough if I just say descend dark stairs to piss? And what about piss? It's not the most decorous of words. P seems stupider. PP is not one we're going to think about. Urinate is a problem. Relieve oneself, fussy. So we're kind of left with piss. I rather like just to piss. I mean, piss. Then it comes back with distant children, just to piss, distant children. But I fret about that just. I was teasing my wife, the benighted fiction writer, about working with backhoes and shovels as fictioneers do. And she looked at me and she went, tweeze, 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 tweeze. It's what we do. Digging our grave with tweezers. You'll see some other pairs start to mess up with the poem toward the end there. What about an inch and a half from the bottom? Where I say, we're more than the words I've chosen for us here, and loved each other, if seldom lovingly, a pair. Then we have a different kind of pair. Love is what I whisper to the flames, one sentence followed by, they burn a little bluer with each breath. Then we go to the next one, two sentences, old man, we're playing, leave us alone, old man. Then we go back to another, the school bell rings, the door I don't see opens, a pair there, it is finished with a third movement, which takes a little of that off. So, I mean, none of these are necessarily wrong, they just I'm aware of them and they bug me. So that is the blank verse version of the poem. If you look at the two-stressed version, I think it's a more, it starts out kind of more interestingly to me. When you have the two stresses and you're not counting the accented, you're only counting the accents and not the unaccented syllables, you can move those beats around. It's a little unstable of a movement because you're not counting those stresses. In this version, I think the doubling tends to disappear because we're in a two-beat, we're very, any short line really, you're more conscious of the phrase, the word, the line than you are when it gets a little bit longer. And those isolated effects, I think, can be pretty interesting. And so you'll see the poem go through yellow, yellow, brushed with red, and red leaves, the children's shouts, fly to my high window, sifted. Spent a lot of time with that fly to my high, because I kept wanting to put a beat on my, it may go there. Fly to my high, yeah, we can talk about that. Sifted through the slurred trill of a cardinal in the oaks, the heavy thwack of balls against brick wall and asphalt. I never quite know how to think about the relationship between lines and sentences, but it does seem to me in the short line. I mean, we say that the emphasis shifts, but we're never unaware of sentences in English, I don't think. We're always reading to find, when we start the sentence, we're reading to find the subject. As soon as we get the sentence, we're reading to find the verb. I do also think that you can see here that it takes a little more concentration to find the subject and the verb in these shorter sentences. When we get down to the end of that second stanza, our old enemy, the preposition, raises its ugly head, and we get, and squabbles mellow to a doubtful melody in the hushing air above their shrill and fluid passions. That's pretty awful. That can be, that's the way it was, and I mean, that can be shifted around a little bit. But you can also see, I think, that the musical effects are emphasized in the poem. Through yellow, yellow, brushed with red and red leaves, the children shouts fly to my high window, sifted through the slurred trill of the cardinals. So that in itself, I think, is a bit of a virtue. And I like if you, but if you go to page the stanza after the italics with that, we're playing, old man, we cannot hear you. That's a voice that came into the poem when I was thinking about it. Our speaker is in a peculiar situation, one that doesn't exist in the natural world. He's looking out the window, and then he's addressing these children. We know that if he's doing that, he's addressing himself. And then this started to seem impossibly solipsistic to me, and because it is. And so actually, I don't like to say this thing, but as I was falling to sleep one night, I kind of heard this other voice say, we're playing, old man, we cannot hear you. And so that entered the poem and seemed right enough, and an adjustment. But anyway, if you look at this line that begins, they are ghosts now. They are ghosts now, the fire-faced screamer, the weeper, and the boy who stared with wonderment into fireplaces, gas grates, the rusted drum of burning trash behind the swayed-back house. I'm starting to bore myself to sleep through here. For some reason, in the longer lines, it seems a little more interesting to me, with different flow going on. This just seems to get wordy as dirt. And I don't quite know why, except, well, whatever's doing it, we can hear it. And it may be just that the series of things is not very happy in these short lines. I can see how it might be squeezed. Also, when you get down to the, we are more than these words I've chosen for us, and have seldom lovingly loved each other. I like that statement. I run it in a bunch of different ways through these lines, but and it seems to me the heart of the poem there. This business about the flames, I'm not sure about it. It seems true. In one way, I was a child who was fascinated by flames. I knew what it meant. It's beautiful, it's flickering, and you learn very early not to touch it. But here, particularly in this version, it looks like poetry has insinuated an ugly version of itself into the poems. Though I do like the last 5 lines. The school bell rings, a door I don't see opens, and the voices all rush towards silence. The school bell rings. You would not normally put a single beat starting a line, but that seems right for the sound. We move to the door. So the school bell rings, pause, a door, pause. I don't see opens, we get a bit of a swing, and the voices all rush towards silence. Yeah, that's an effect I actually like in the 2-beat movement there. Iambic tetrameter, without rhyme, can give us an approximation of blank verse that tips away from the discourse mode of blank verse toward lyric. It moves more quickly from left to right than blank verse, but with greater regularity and with greater regularity and less edginess than the 2-stress accentual line. My wife likes this version the best, and it's a pretty good compromise between the two. Through yellow brushed with red and red foliage, the children's shouts fly to my high window, sifted through the slurred trill of cardinals in the oaks and ashes, the heavy thwack of balls against brick wall and asphalt, and a soft wind disheveling the leaves to susurration. There are those doublings that were bothering me, and the blank verse seemed to disappear a little bit. I'm a little happier with this. I left out just to piss, and descend dark stairs to piss. Is that clear enough, by the way? Do I need the just, or should I leave it in? Well, talk to me later. Buy me a drink. buy me a drink. I realized looking this over, when I get this place where I break down and I talk to the school children, is it worse for you or better? It's a fairly weak little rhetorical situation. Is it weak? Is it worse for you, my dears, or better? Maybe, maybe not. Warms it up a little bit. I'm kind of interested, though, in the I'm going to look at the rhyming iambic pentameter first. When you add the rhyme to it, you immediately hear the music come back in. This is not a particularly deft version. I ran out of time and not exactly patience. I'd like to go back and make it work a little bit better in the rhyming version. But you'll see I get a little bit desperate rhyming Babel and cardinals. In the next stanza, I have wall and all, but confuse it by having balls in there. In the first line, air and theirs, do you grant that rhyme with an S? Flailed and assailed, not bad. Rise and cries. I actually like enraged and aged a little bit further down, but let me show you. It's a little uncomfortable in places. Through yellow brushed with red and red leaves, the children's babble flies to my high window, sifted through the slurred trill of a cardinal. in the oaks, or cardinals in the oaks, whichever. The heavy thwack of balls off cracked asphalt and brick wall, and a soft wind is shoveling the leaves to susurration. All the children's joy and squabbles mellow to a vague melody in the air above their shrill and fluid passions. I'm in jamming over stanzas. That's not a problem, but it becomes a bit of it begins to bespeak of ineptitude in this poem, because you can feel that the sentences want to go into their own stanzas a little bit. But you can hear, can't you, what the rhyme is doing to the poem? You can hear that it focuses our attention on those end words. It creates a certain solidness that's kind of interesting. The quatrains remind us strongly of song, and the poem has a couple of effects that I am kind of interested in this version. One, those italicized repeated lines become a rhymed line. They in one poem and an unrhymed line in the other, they're more integrated into the movement in a way that makes sense than if I were to, in the other versions, I separate them out. There's a movement, and the poem also squeezes a little bit. I had to cut some stuff out, and it has a certain effect of, you have to think about the syntax a little bit more, I think, as you read it. It has a certain kind of more enigmatic quality that you'll often see in, when you'd see Auden or C.S. Lewis working in these quatrains. It makes you think your way through them a little bit differently. But I do like this one little effect. Distant children, have you heard cries half squelched behind the bedroom door, and a sad father frequently enraged about money, himself, you? I haven't unheard them as I've aged. There's that nice little effect of that rhyme calling, the speaker calling himself a little bit on the carpet, and also enjoying his self-pity. And then at the end of the poem, you'll see, love is what I promised the golden flames that with each breath glow slightly bluer with my lies. I kind of like that. The rhyme forced me to call those promises, that statement of love, a lie. And then I had to find a way to end the poem fairly sharply. The school bell tolls 5 terse goodbyes. That's a sharper, crisper ending than I've allowed in the other versions you've seen, and that also opened my eyes to some possibilities in this material. The version that I both like and resist is the hexameter version, and in it, with the hexameter, we start to, I think, stop hearing the lines. The shift here is very strongly to the sentences. Let me find my notes on that one. This has been a little hard to organize. It's not in that pile. Oh, darn it. As much time as I had to do this, you think that, I did, but the pages are all kind of slipping and sliding around each other. Here it is. Here, the sentences are more important than the line. I'm not sure that many of us can hear 6 beats in a line without seeing it on the page. I don't know that I can. The hexameter line can break 3 threes, which is a strange rhythm to our ears. This one, I think, actually kind of works around that one. It can be prosy, but this one was tuned in other ways, so I think the prosiness is downplayed. What I'm noticing is a certain sonorousness, it's a sentence sonorousness, but I both like it and I'm very distrustful of it. Through yellow, yellow brushed with red and red leaves, the children's shouts fly to my high window, sifted through the slurred trill of cardinals and the oaks and luashes, the heavy thwack of balls against brick wall and asphalt, and a soft wind shoveling the leaves to susurration. The children's joy and squabbles mellow to a doubtful melody in the air above their shrill and fluid passions. It's easy now to dwell in elegance, an adult elegiacally balancing his unmourned childhood against his hope for theirs. Once off Cape Hatteras, I flailed my hands raw in granite breakwaters and nearly drowned with less despair than it took as a child, that grinds on a bit, to rise in shadows and descend dark stairs just to piss. Distant children, have you heard, as I still hear, a mother's squelched sobs behind her bedroom door, and a sad father frequently furious about money, himself, you, about it seems everything. We're playing in the leaves, old man, we cannot hear you. I added in the leaves, you can see how that changes the rhythm entirely and smooths it out and makes it not exactly sentimental, but a little late Victorian. They are ghosts now, the weeper, the red-faced screamer, the boy who stared with wonderment into fireplaces, campfires, the rusted drum of burning trash behind the house, and the match that fired his mother's smoke and filled her with ash. We loved the gold flame's beautiful severity. We're more than these words I've chosen for us, and loved each other, if seldom lovingly. Love is what I whisper to the flames that burn a little bluer with each breath. Old man, we're playing in the leaves. Leave us alone. The school bell rings 3 times. A door I don't see opens, and the voices all rush toward it into silence. I'm deeply suspicious of that sonorousness, and yet it has a certain effect that is interesting. And that is about as far as I've got with the poem, except I thought, well, what about ending this thing? That ending I have there is a bit of a placekeeper, and I liked it in some versions of the poem more than others. One of the first impulses I think we have in ending a poem is, and I think of this completely pejoratively, as the resort to nature. This is Jonathan Culler building on the work of the Russian formalist critic Viktor Shklovsky and Roland Barthes, and he says, but there is also what Shklovsky calls the illusory ending, an extreme case which nicely illustrates the power of readers' formal expectations and the ingenuity that will be used to produce a sense of completion. Usually, it is descriptions of nature or the weather that furnish material for these illusory endings. This new motif is inscribed as a parallel to the preceding story, thanks to which the tale seems completed. A description of the weather can provide a satisfactory conclusion because the reader gives it a metaphoric or syndochaic interpretation and reads this thematic statement against the actions themselves. So I could end this poem, and the red leaves start to fall. Death. A quick breeze lifts the red leaves toward the sky. Transcendence in death. A silver blue cloud clips the sun's western edge, evocative of death and transcendence, but committing to neither. A light rain begins to fall, and the children's voices funnel toward the schoolhouse door. Recess is brief and work long. A few still bright red and yellow leaves break free and drift down among the unceasing voices. The continuity of life amid death and the cycles of nature. This is easy. We could do this all day long, right? But there are other ways. Some of these are things I've observed from from my own work, others, and also I draw on Barbara Herrnstein Smith's Poetic Closure. We could end with a literary allusion, this one to Eliot from Burnt Norton. The bell rang and suddenly the leaves were empty of children. Or, also from Eliot, a voice called and quickly, quickly, the children ran from paradise toward a door held open by their master. Or Thomas Gray, instead of saying the curfew tolls the knell of parting day, we could say the school bell tolls the end of thoughtless play. Or biblical allusion. The bell rang and Eden emptied, abandoning innocence to the intervening trill of cardinals. Allusion to popular culture, the one that we could steal from Eliot again. An adult voice, a hush, and the children's voices pierce the leaves again, singing, London Bridge is falling down, falling down, falling down. We could go on forever substituting children's poems, each with a different meaning. Hush, little baby, don't you cry. The wheels of the bus go round and round. Deutschland über alles. We could stay in the established scene, which I did. A bell I don't hear rings, a door I don't see opens, and the voices rush toward silence. Or those 5 tolls that I had. We could also expand past the established scene and change perspective. For instance, we could go back to those original notes and pull that steeple back in. A block away, a white steeple juts through browning leaves, or a yellowing white steeple tilts alarmingly above the schoolyard, or imagistically, graying paint from the school's old white steeple speckles the leaf tops. Or we could go into the newspapers, absolutely true fact. Last week in Nigeria, 29 students were, by militants, burned alive. Our lives versus their lives. We could go personal. So awful. We end with the speaker saying, my mother will not live through the night. This is another one. When night falls, we will see that Arcturus, the guardian of the bear, still patrols the sky above us. We could change perspective by reminding us of the fictive nature of poetry. The children file into the school, and the words with which I have made them follow behind. But my favorite is maybe the undergraduate surprise male ending. The leaves stand between me and the children, but soon the leaves will begin to fall, and sight lines will improve. I remove the loophole scope and Harris bipod, unscrew the TAC-op suppressor from my tactical operation Tango 51 sniper rifle, and place each component carefully in the foam-lined case. I take one last look out the window. Yes, the leaves are falling more rapidly now. The adult surprise ending. Among the voices blended down below, I cannot discern my son's earnest tenor. Undergrad ending, female version. Soon my lover asleep in the bedroom will rise, dress quickly, kiss me, murmur his usual promises, retrieve his daughters from the school below, and return home to their mother. The Ouroboros, when the poem eats its own tail, you know you've done it. And we could start where we began. Through yellow, yellow brushed with red, and red foliage, the children's shouts fly to my high window. The Ouroboros with extension, through yellow, the children's shouts fly to my window, and I pull the shade against the bright but falling sun. the modified Ouroboros, in which the poet scours the rest of the poem looking for a thread to pull back through to the end. I light a candle and stare into the beautiful inconstant gases, yellow, orange, and blue at the wick. We could go back to repetition, signaling closure. Old man, we're playing Leave Us Alone. Or the school bell tolls goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. I didn't like that one. We could have repetition with modification. Old man, we're playing in our first world, leave us alone. We could do rhetorical flourish. You could take the prettiest line of your poem and move it to the end. Their joy in squabbles mellow to a doubtful melody in the shushing air above their shrill and fluid passions. I'm weeping. Or you could end with an anecdote. When my mother lifted me onto the yellow bus, quavering in diesel stench at the end of the red dirt drive, I stared at the driver and trembled in the cold regard of a guardian who did not love me, as I now regard the distant children. I do not know in which form the poem will find its final version. I do not know whatever ending I finally will go with, but I know it will not be one of these. I may stop the poem entirely now and let it exist only in these variants and this essay, which is done. Thank you.